Welcome, Campfire Crew. Let's get it on. Stalker Truck by Jarreton 1781. The creepiest drive I ever had was back in 2008 when I was moving from Seattle to Washington, D.C. The route was down to Portland, then I-84 to I-80 to I-76 to I-70 to I-270. Immediately heading out of Portland, I passed an old F-100 going very slow. It was in primer black with no license plates. A cool truck, I thought, and didn't really pay it any other mind. I noticed about an hour later that the same truck was a couple of car lengths behind me. Odd. After getting back to some open roads, he disappeared into the distance behind me. That first night I stopped somewhere in Idaho. Shitty, cheap local motel, and I'm the only one there. I woke up the next morning and parked one spot away from me was that primered black F-100. I took off, continuing my trek southeast. Every single time I stopped for gas, at a rest stop, or get slowed down for traffic, that old Ford showed up in my rearview mirror again. This was bizarre. Nearing the end of Nebraska, I pulled over to get gas and decided to drive one more tank and then stop for the day. I pulled back onto the highway, and Mr. Truck is right there shadowing me again. About 30 minutes later, I realize I'm too tired to get to the end of that tank and decide to stop in the next town just over the border in Iowa. As I was getting off the road, I see that pickup pass on, carrying down the highway. I guess he had more endurance than I did. I woke up the next morning, and you know what's coming. That damn truck is in the hotel parking lot again. Up to this point, I just figured I was driving Hare to his tortoise, and we just happened to be making the same west-east coast trip. Now I had that weird light feeling in my stomach, like something was just off. I asked the clerk when turning in my keys, "What's up with that truck? When did it come in?" She says she wasn't working last night and wasn't sure, and also probably thought I was crazy, which maybe I was. Anyhow, at that point, I figured it must be a coincidence, and this has to be a different truck. I mean, there were a lot of F-100s made, and there's bound to be a couple in the country that are primer black running with no plates. As I go to head out, I see the truck turning out of the parking lot in the direction that leads him away from the highway. Couldn't have been the same one from before. The guy didn't turn in his keys, so he was probably staying locally. I get back on the highway. No truck. I run to the end of the tank and get gas and some snacks. I get back on the road, and I merge in two cars in front of a primer black F-100. What the hell? At that point, I decide, screw it. I'm marathoning the rest of the way. It's less than 20 hours, so it shouldn't be so bad, and I don't want to stay at another shitty motel with strange ghost trucks stalking me. The pattern continues with the truck showing up behind me every single time I take a break or get gas or get slowed in traffic. It was dark when I got to the I-70-270 split, and the old headlights are glowing back on the horizon. I know it's him. I wonder if it's going to follow me down 270 and park down the street near my house the next morning when I wake up. Alas, the truck continued on 70, and I never saw it again. Looking back, it was probably a confluence or a coincidence. It still feels really odd to me, though, because it's not like there were a lot of F-100s doing interstate runs in 2008. I also realized that I never got a good look at the driver. Not that there was no driver, but in my memories, all I see is an indistinct human-shaped thing driving an old truck that stalked me for 3,000 miles. Screaming Demons of Hicks Road by Miguel. I'm going to tell you about the time I took Hicks Road in San Jose, and while I'll never do it again. It was getting late, and all I had for company was my car's radio. I had the windows rolled down, which allowed the nice breeze to come through my vehicle and whisk around my ears. I mean, seriously, this was an amazing time for a nice drive. As the hour grew late, I flicked on my high beams and traveled back towards my house, but I decided to take the more scenic route, which was Hicks Road. While on the road, I noticed that my high beams kept reflecting on eyeballs off the road. I just summed it up to be some sort of wildlife, but I was terribly wrong. Nature began to call on my little drive, so I decided to do what any red-blooded American would do in this given situation. I pulled over to the side of the road to take a leak. I got out of my vehicle, left the radio on as well as my lights. That way, if a passing vehicle came by, they wouldn't hit it. As I was standing there doing my business, it really bothered me how silent it was outside. I mean, for all of this wildlife I had spotted on the drive, I didn't even hear crickets. With my lights in the car left on, I noticed that they were reflecting on eyes in the distance. Still, I assumed it was wildlife, but why couldn't I hear anything? While I was standing there, something just didn't feel right, and that's when the smell hit me. I have absolutely no idea what this smell was, but it hit me like a ton of bricks, and it stunk so bad I almost puked all over the ground in front of me. It was the smell of some sort of rotten meat mixed with, like, spoiled milk or something. Once I regained myself, I looked out to the field and all around me. That's when I noticed the number of eyes in the field had nearly tripled, and they were watching me. It was creeping me out, and I was ready to get the hell out of there. That's when I noticed the eyes were actually getting closer. As I struggled to zip up my pants and make sure everything was tucked in, I noticed the eyes were approaching much faster than before. Whatever it was running at me. So I quickly made my way back to my car as fast as I could, banging my knee on the rear fender on my way. I launched into the driver's seat while simultaneously closing the door behind me. The figures were almost to my passenger window, so I made sure to lock my car and rolled the windows up as fast as humanly possible. When my windows were up, I put that baby in drive and floored it. I spun gravel on the side of the road, but my car gained traction and I launched forward. It was at that time that I saw something with a horrible white face slam right up against my passenger side window. Suddenly, I saw a ton more of these things emerge from the field. It wasn't the eyes of wildlife I had been seeing. They were some sort of humanoid creatures. They let out this insane, shrill scream while I was driving away, and they were all running towards my car. I can only imagine what would have happened if I hadn't rolled my windows up, or if I hadn't made it back to my car in time. Don't Drive Tired by One Fast Puerto Rican. In spring break 1997, I was heading out to Houston from Lubbock and looking forward to a nice weekend of doing nothing. With a few stops, the drive normally takes about 8.5 to 9 hours. The plan was to stop in Austin for the night at a good friend's and then head out to Houston, about 2.5 hours away, the next morning. For the record, I was driving an '85 Sentra hatchback. No AC, no cruise control. Thanks, Dad. Due to work commitments, I couldn't leave Lubbock until about 6 p.m. I stopped at a friend's house for a quick bite before hitting the road, and it was now 7. The drive itself was very uneventful until I got to Austin. About 12:30 in the morning, I reached Austin and found a bank of payphones before the era everyone had a cell phone. I called my friend to say, "I'm not tired. Really, I'm just going to make the short drive to Houston." My buddy says, "Are you sure? It's pretty late, man." I say, "Yeah, I'm good. I'll call you in the morning when I'm in H-Town." I hang up, fill up the tank before heading out again. It's now 1 a.m. At 2:30 a.m., I reach Brenham and can barely keep my eyes open. I'm doing every trick in the book. Loud music, window open, slapping face, punching myself. Nothing is working. Just past Brenham on 290 is a combination levee bridge highway designed to keep the freeway high and dry during big floods. The last thing I remember was closing my eyes and opening them suddenly to see my car plunging down the levee with me inside it. I must have been doing between 60 and 70 miles per hour when I went downhill, and luckily the high grass kept me from either overturning or nailing the bottom of the levee. So, I stopped about 15 feet from the bottom of the levee. It's the middle of the night, and no one can see my car down the embankment. No cell phone, no witnesses, car won't start. After a quick check on myself, I got out of the car and stumbled out the driver's side door. I started climbing up the levee to flag down someone to help. Yeah, right. People are just going to stop when they see some Mexican-looking fellow waving his arms in the middle of nowhere at 2:45 in the morning. Finally, an 18-wheeler stopped and I borrowed his cell phone. I called my dad, who was unsure of what to do. Thanks, Pop. But then I called a wrecker to pull my car out. The trucker offered to wait until the wrecker arrived, but I got really creeped out just sitting there, so I said, "Yeah, I'm good. I'll just wait by the side of the road." The trucker left, and I was all alone again. After a few minutes, I realized that I'll probably be waiting for an hour for the wrecker, so I decided to get back in my car and see if I can't throw it in reverse. Not sure if I had an angel on my shoulder, but the car fired right up. As I threw it into reverse, it truly felt like a Christmas miracle. All the way up the embankment, I drove backwards and made it to the top by the side of the freeway. Got out and checked around. Wheels? Okay. Body damage? Nothing too noticeable. Engine? Looks like the underneath of a lawnmower, but it all looks okay. Belts are still belting. Let's go. I put it in first gear and I heard a wobble from the wheels. Not sure what it was, but nothing's going to stop me from making it to Houston, damn it. My top speed after the accident was about 40 miles an hour. I reached my parents' house at about 5 in the morning. Tired, sore, and still a bit in shock, I told my parents what happened before I collapsed in my bed. When I woke up sometime around noon, I went to survey the damage. I had completely stripped 2 of the 4 lugs off the right wheel and 1 lug off the left wheel. I'm damn lucky that 1 or both wheels didn't fly off the car after my accident. I also realized that if I had gone off 15 seconds later, my car probably would have been upside down in that creek. So, yeah, never pass up a chance to sleep during a long road trip. Bad Neighborhood, submitted by Razor Rod. Many moons ago, on Thanksgiving, my wife and I were going to spend the holiday at her sister's house with her extended family in Collinsville, Illinois. We lived outside of Kansas City, Missouri, and we were just going to make the drive over. The problem was, we both had to work late Thanksgiving Eve at our jobs. Yeah, you'd think that very cool employers would let people out a little early, but not so for us, at least not back then. So, after we got our things together, got our dogs in our RAV4 and started to shove off on the 4-hour drive, we didn't leave until about 8 p.m. We could have waited until the morning, but we didn't want to travel on the holiday. We just wanted to wake up with our family and enjoy the day's festivities. I drove for the first couple of hours and let my wife spell me at the wheel afterwards, as she was more familiar with the drive over through St. Louis. I kind of drifted off slightly, remembering that there was a funny jog we needed to take off I-70 to get to a bridge to get into Illinois. If you're from the area, I'm talking about the McKinley Bridge. So it was about an hour or so after I conked out that my wife asked me to wake up and help her remember to get off at the right place. As I mentioned, it's a quick turnaround to get onto McKinley Street and then the bridge. But unfortunately, by the time she woke me up, she was already off I-70 and now driving through neighborhoods. Having made this trip with her more than once, but again not as familiar with the territory, I just said, "Honey, this doesn't look right at all." She said, "I know. I don't know where to turn though." Guys, this is before GPS and smartphones. Yeah, we had a road map, but we were in a residential area, and as I was fumbling to grab the map, I kept asking her to tell me what streets she was passing. It was late, we were both tired, and she was getting frustrated with me because I couldn't give her immediate directions as to where to go. I finally told her to pull over as soon as she could, and she got to the next cross street. I needed to figure out where the fuck we were, and in the back of my mind I was thinking, what a great way to start out Thanksgiving. My wife's pissed off at me for something I didn't even do. When she stopped, I turned on the overhead light in our SUV to get an idea of where we were. I took a quick look around and we were at the corner of North 20th Street and Penrose. I don't like to look down on people, but this neighborhood looked pretty sketch, and as I mentioned, it was late. So I tried to look at the map and figure out where we needed to go to get to McKinley Street and the bridge. It looked like a straight shot down Penrose to North 11th Street, so I told my wife that, and she said okay, finally starting to calm down a bit. I looked back at our dogs who were still asleep in the back and gave a soft laugh and said, "Hey, sometimes you have to go off the beaten path for a more interesting trip." Looking back, I wish I would have kept my mouth shut. No sooner than I had said that, than the back of our RAV4 dipped, and there was a tap on the glass of the driver's side door. My wife had been looking at me as I'd been looking at the map, and we both turned at the same time to see a guy in dark clothing tapping with what looked like a gun on the window. I looked closer, and in fact, it didn't just look like a gun. It was a gun. My wife screamed, and I told her to just floor it. For whatever reason, she froze, and the guy hauled his hand back with the gun, and I thought he was going to punch the glass with it if we didn't leave. Somehow, my wife got herself back into reality, put the RAV4 into drive, and stepped on the gas. We heard some muffled yelling, but we didn't care. My wife was hysterical at this point, and I was trying to reassure her that it was okay. We just needed to get out of this neighborhood. I told her, no cop, no stop. Just get to North 11th Street and make a right. She didn't want to at first and wanted to stop at every intersection, but I just yelled at her to get the fuck out of here. We kept hearing this muffled yelling, and I couldn't figure out what the hell it was. But when we finally got to North 11th Street, my wife did come to a complete stop. Suddenly, the back of the RAV4 bounced again, and I spun around to see a man standing behind our vehicle holding a gun. We heard him yell, "You dumb motherfuckers! You tried to kill me!" Apparently, he had stepped onto the back of our RAV4 and for the last few blocks as we sped out of that place, had been holding onto the spare wheel mounted on the back. I told my wife, "Go!" She hit the gas, and we tore back to the big intersection where we needed to make a left to finally get to the McKinley Bridge. To say we were shook up is an understatement. My wife was crying at this point, and the dogs had started freaking out after the guy was yelling, and of course the commotion of us speeding around. But we got out of there unscathed. We made it over the bridge into Illinois and finally to Collinsville. When we pulled into my sister-in-law's driveway, it was just after midnight. I herded the dogs inside while my wife ran in ahead of me. I went back for our bags while she told her family, who was still awake having drinks and just sitting around talking, about what had just happened. My father-in-law kind of snickered when he heard that we had just been driving around late at night in Hyde Park, what we found out was a really bad neighborhood of St. Louis. My wife hadn't yet gotten to the part about the guns, and when she did, the laughter stopped. Everyone got really serious, and was very happy that we got out of there okay, and didn't get into more trouble. We ended up having an awesome Thanksgiving, but the buzz for the next 2 days was all about our wayward trip into what I would later find out was truly a very dangerous neighborhood. These days, I'm so thankful for the technology we have when we're driving so as to avoid neighborhoods like that. And on top of that, my wife and I have made a deal that we will no longer make trips at night, only during the day. Stalked on the Back Roads by Crimson. A little background. I was about 8 when my mother, little sister, and I were taking a road trip across Wyoming. This wasn't unusual, as we had family living all across the state, and my mom loved piling us in the car and driving. My memory of this event is patchy, but I remember it more for the way my mom reacted than for the event itself. I don't remember exactly where this was, or where we were headed, but anyone who has ever driven through Wyoming knows that the roads are mostly deserted. We'd been driving several hours behind an older green and white truck. We were approaching a gas station, and I remember my little sister being so excited because she wanted to get those little bottles made of wax that had juice in them. The green and white truck pulled into the gas station, and we followed. We used the restrooms, got some snacks, my mom filled us up with gas, and we got back into the car and back onto the road. A little time passed, and my mom asked, "Is that truck behind us the same one that we followed into the gas station?" I turned in my seat and confirmed that it was the same truck. I sat back down and continued gorging myself on snacks, but I sensed that my mom was uneasy. She kept looking in her rearview mirror and watching that truck. It was a long drive to the next gas station, and along the way, the truck behind us would speed up and get dangerously close to us, and then back away a little. After a stretch of several miles, we were nearing another gas station. My mom adjusted her mirror so she could see us in the back seat. She said, "I'm going to pull into this gas station and open my door like I'm getting out. I don't want you two to open your doors. Don't get out. Just sit tight and hang on." My little sister and I looked at each other like, "Okay." I thought it was strange, but the look in her eyes scared me a little. My mom is a calm person, but she has this presence about her that makes you aware that she isn't to be messed with. All of my friends throughout the years have been more than a little scared of her, which is odd considering she's just over 5 feet tall and about 100 pounds. Anyway, we pulled into the station and up to a pump. My mom adjusted her mirror to see behind us and opened her door with the car still running. The green and white truck pulled in and parked just to the side of the turn-in. The driver popped his hood, got out, came around to the front of his truck and propped up his hood. He started messing around under the hood with his back to us, and from what I remember of him, he was a really big guy, but who isn't to an 8-year-old girl? My mom slammed her door and peeled out of the gas station. I turned in my seat to watch the man. He turned around like he was startled, looked right at us, quickly closed his hood, even though he had only been looking in there for a few seconds. At this point, my mom is driving so fast that I lose sight of him. I was terrified, and I knew it must be serious for my mom to drive like this. Up ahead, the road bent sharply to the left, and there was a small road to the right of a few buildings. Just before the bend, my mom slammed on the brakes, pulled the steering wheel all the way to the right, and, as if it were straight out of an action movie, slides around the corner. She sped through the small parking lot of one of the buildings and parked it. From our vantage point, we were hidden from traffic behind us, but we could see anyone passing. A short time later, we watched the green and white truck speed right past us and around the bend in the road. Obviously, my sister and I were very shaken up. My mom asked if we needed to use the restroom, and we said yes. She said she did too, but we would wait here for a bit and then make our way to the next station. I'll never forget what she said next, because it was so out of character for her. She said, "I'd rather piss my pants in this car than be murdered on the side of the road." A little time passed, and we got back on the road, and we continued on our trip. We never saw that truck again. The Forest Road, submitted by Funky Boss Carl. My friends and I had decided to do some fishing on the Coosa River in Alabama last summer, and this would be 2018 for those that care. Not the main river that runs into Jordan Lake, but closer to Hatchet Creek, maybe a couple of miles over the river from Higgins Ferry. There was me, Joey, and Marty. My name is Carl for reference. It was a nice hot day, and we were just out for some crappie, bass, and channel cat. We brought along plenty of gear, sandwiches, and water, and Bud Light. We were having a blast catching, or in some cases not catching anything, the latter for Marty, but we were still enjoying the day, fishing and just hanging out. I remember at one point thinking that we were being watched, but I'm not a superstitious guy. I shrugged it off and just figured there were other people out fishing and maybe walking behind us in the woods. We had walked down a path where we had left my Jeep and then had to trek through a bunch of trees to get to the river at a point where there were some rocks at the edge of the trees. Where we were, there was no beaches or anything like that. In short, it's just the middle of nowhere. We We stopped fishing to have some lunch and relax in the shade, and I brought up the fact that I thought I heard somebody else walking around in the woods. And Marty, the guy who wasn't catching anything, said, "Yeah, I thought I heard something too, but who knows? Could be anything. There's tons of animals out here, you know that. And even if it wasn't animals, it could just be other folks out for a hike, or maybe they're fishing too." I lit up a smoke and said, "Yeah, you're probably right then." We continued to fish for the rest of the afternoon, and when it started to get dark, we talked about heading home. Joey came from a pretty shitty family and didn't really want to go home right away, and he suggested that maybe we just go on a drive through the back roads for a while, until it got dark. We all knew about his family, and the three of us were really close, so I figured, what the hell, I drove, we've got more buds than we need, so why don't we just have a slow cruise through the woods? It was then about 7 p.m., and while the sun doesn't set until around 8 at that time of the year, when you're out in the woods, things get darker a heck of a lot faster. I'm pretty sure anybody who spends time outside knows this. So we packed up our gear and got back to my Jeep Wrangler and loaded up. Everyone took a pause that refreshes, and I remember firing up a smoke, still getting that weird feeling that something was a little off on this day. We jumped in the Jeep. I put on some Holiday Gunfire, a pretty cool band from Birmingham that my older brother had turned me on to. A quick sidebar. They're a really cool band. You should check them out. I began driving back to where the dirt path turned into a more civilized road. Then I started looking for some of the other off-road paths. When I say off-road, I mean just dirt paths, not like crazy mudding paths. We were just driving along, having a few smokes and beers, and as it got darker and darker, I had to turn the lights on. We were driving for a little while longer, and it came to a dead end in another dirt road. We all stopped to have another pause that refreshes before turning around. And again, I got that weird feeling that something just wasn't right, but I didn't mention it to the other guys. It was then that I suggested we head home for Clam, something to eat and maybe another beer or two at a bar. Everyone agreed, and I started to turn my Jeep around to make the trip back. It was now pitch black out there as we made our way down the path we had just come. All of a sudden, Marty, who was riding shotgun, said, "Hey, what is that?" I hadn't seen it yet, but suddenly I did. I slowed down, and that's when all three of us saw that there was a rope or some kind of cord strung across the path between two trees. Hanging from the rope were the severed heads of 3 or 4 possums and a couple of raccoons. Those were certainly not there when we first came through. I mean, how the hell would we have driven right by that and not seen it? It was high enough that I could get under it, and we slowly did so while Marty was taking a video of it on his phone. I would share that with you, but unfortunately Marty no longer has that phone after it fell into a pool and he lost all of his data. Anyway, we were kind of shaken up. I mean, who wouldn't be? We were freaked out, and I picked up the pace and got back to the highway and headed south for a freeway to get back home. I couldn't stop talking about what we had just seen, and I assure you, this was not something out of a few Bud Lights that we had. Someone had to have been following us for whatever reason and hung those heads to make sure that we would see them. Of course, it could have been just a prank, and I don't want to go too deep into what might have been happening out there, but it was still totally strange and totally random. We actually went back the following week, but the heads were gone and there was no rope or whatever hanging between the trees. That makes us think that whatever or whoever did that did it deliberately to scare us. All I can say to whoever was out there that did that in an attempt to freak us out? Hey, mission accomplished. You Are Gonna Die by Fumscappy. One night, I was out getting gas, and after I left, I pulled up to a red light behind a beater car, and we were both turning right onto a 2-lane highway. We both make the right, and his car doesn't go very fast, so I head for the left lane. He blocks me. I headed for the right lane. He immediately killed his signal and cut me off again. This continued for a little while before I got annoyed, so I gun it and go to pass him. Again, while in the process of passing, this guy takes a dive at my car, which slows me down. He's yelling at me out his window, "You aren't passing me, motherfucker!" And he's laughing maniacally. We got caught at another light, and he started chucking stuff at my car. I checked the traffic and gunned it through the red light. I'm sufficiently creeped out now. His car seems to be faster than I initially thought, and he's keeping up with me through traffic. In desperation, I started turning off side streets, and he was following me. We got to another light, and I asked what his problem is, and he screams, literally screams at me, "You are gonna die tonight!" Holy fuck. So I chuck an old coffee into his car, turn off my lights, and take the fuck off as fast as I could go. At this point, stoplights aren't a concern anymore. I want to be pulled over. I'm ripping through little towns at 100 miles an hour in 25 and 30 mile an hour zones. I was starting to lose him. I finally ducked into a side street and somehow found a driveway that was next to a garage. I pulled up next to it, turned off the lights with the car still on, and waited. 1 minute, 3 minutes, 10 minutes. I finally got home about 45 minutes later, white as a ghost. I called the police. I didn't have my cell at the time, and I reported this guy in. I never found out if anything happened, and I never saw that car or guy again. But I literally thought I was going to be murdered. For nothing. How did this happen? Submitted by Anonymous. Hey, Uncle Josh. I'm sending you this story, and I would like to remain anonymous. It's a very strange but embarrassing story that I haven't told anyone other than my family. I think you'll see why as the story goes along, if you so choose to read it. I was encouraged to share my story because I have just watched a show on the History Channel about something very similar that happened to me. Not to the extent of what happened to that guy, but there is this strange gap in time that I can't explain, and neither can my family. I'm in my early 30s, and I work for my father. I have since high school. He's owned a number of businesses, and still does. One of them includes transportation of vehicles and trailers. This also includes mobile homes and things like that. Basically, when he makes a purchase or a sale, I drive a flatbed or whatever truck is needed to move whatever merchandise he needs to have moved. It could be a car, it could be a camper, it could be whatever comes down the pipeline that we can transport. Concerning the story that I'm sending you, I had to drive a vehicle from our headquarters in Atlanta, Georgia to Brookhaven, West Virginia. Not a problem. Got in the truck, loaded things up, and took off. When I got to the final stop, my father called and said he got a sweet deal on a Range Rover for a customer, but it was located outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He wanted me to continue heading north to pick up the Range Rover and then bring it back to Atlanta. At this time, it was a Thursday afternoon around 2:30. He told me that while he knew it wasn't the original plan, and I did have some pretty serious plans with friends that weekend, we were actually heading to the coast to do some deep-sea fishing. He apologized, but said he really needed me to do this, and what's a devoted son going to do? Of course I said yes, and I thought I could make the trip back that night if I left at a decent time. Getting to Pittsburgh was only about an hour and a half away from where I was in West Virginia. So, if I left at 4 and really made good time, I could probably get back to Atlanta at 2 or 3 in the morning. My dad told me because he was doing this, he was going to give me Friday off to get ready for my trip. And you know what? I thought that was a deal and a half. I got the address and the name of the guy who was selling us the Range Rover, and off north I went. The load-up was a snap, and I was on my way a little after 4 p.m. As the term goes, I was southbound and down. Before I shoved off, I loaded up on Mountain Dew and snacks. Very rare for me as I'm kind of a fitness nut, but I thought the caffeine would help me make the trip. It was uneventful, and as I continued on, I didn't have to stop for gas until about 5 hours later, and I got off 77 to fuel up in a town called Bland, Virginia. I walked around for a little bit to stretch my legs, and I noticed a strange light in the sky. I should mention that this was in August and the skies were clear. Lots of stars out that night, but this one was shining brighter than the others. I just thought maybe a comet or something. I just got some more food and drinks and headed back on the road. Now here's where the weird part starts. As I got onto the ramp to get back onto 77, I noticed that the light in the sky that I had noticed earlier was now much bigger. I remember that there weren't that many people on the interstate at that time, but I paid no mind to it, just thinking about the cool trip that we were going to go on that weekend. I was so ready to hit the ocean. It was a bunch of my high school friends getting back together, and that's really what was preoccupying my brain. So, again, southbound and down, moving as fast as I could, but also knowing that I had an extremely expensive vehicle on my flatbed. Every once in a while, I would look out my driver's side window and see that light still seemed to be getting bigger. This is going to sound corny, but the first thing that I thought of was my Sunday school teachings and the star in the sky that had everyone going to see Jesus. If I recall correctly, it's the Star of Bethlehem. I know it's kind of dumb, but I'm just saying what I first thought of. I kept on going and everything was moving smoothly. I glanced over again, and the light was even brighter this time, and I wondered if anyone else on the road was seeing what I was seeing. Just before the North Carolina border, my check engine light came on, and my heart sank. I pulled over on the shoulder of the road to see if it was something simple, because with this truck that I've been driving, sometimes things like this happen from time to time. It was a sturdy Ford, but once in a while would act up. I had to remind myself of that. So I popped the hood, got out, and went and checked all the belts, fluids, all that kind of stuff to see if anything was wrong. There didn't seem to be any issue. Nothing smelled funny, nothing seemed off. The truck was operating fine. As far as I could tell, it was tip-top. I got back into the cab, and that's when I noticed a light on the highway up ahead of me. But it wasn't in the sky. It looked like a spotlight on a stage. I'm sure your listeners are already thinking this guy is out of his head, but I could not be more serious than I am right now. This white light came straight towards my truck, and in seconds my entire vehicle was bathed in this gigantic bright light. I strained my neck after rolling down the window to see what the heck was going on. I kind of freaked out, so I just put it in drive and started going like a madman back down 77. Now I said what got weird back then, but this is where it gets really screwed up. I have zero recollection of driving through North Carolina. I don't remember going through Charlotte or getting onto 85. From where I was when I saw that light, I probably had another 5 hours and change to go to get to Atlanta, so it should have been around 2 or 3 in the morning when I got there. It wasn't. I rolled into the lot of my father's business at 10 p.m. That's what the clock on the truck read. That's what my watch said. That's what the little neon clock that hangs over the door to my father's office said. I sat there dumbfounded for at least 10 minutes. I didn't know what to do. I called my dad and said, "Hey, I'm here." And he was as flabbergasted as me. He said, "What do you mean you're here?" And I said, "I'm at the shop. I've got the Range Rover." There was a long pause on the phone, and he said, "Son, that's impossible." I just said, "Dad, I'm here." And again, he was silent, and he said, "Son, if you're pulling my leg, I'm going to beat your ass." Then he said he would be down in a few minutes. I sat in my truck in a daze wondering what the hell had happened. I had the manifest right next to me. 4:07 p.m., Mount Lebanon, Pennsylvania. A 10 to 11 hour trip, yet here I was just 6 hours later. My dad finally got there and got out of his truck. He didn't know what to say. I hopped out and waved him over to check the Range Rover, and he stepped forward but then stopped. I asked what was wrong, and he asked if I'd been smoking reefer. I said I hadn't. Why? He said I just smelled like burnt cinnamon or something, then finally walked over closer. He looked at the Range Rover, looked at me, and then grabbed me by the elbow gently and said, "Are you okay, son?" I said, "Yeah, Dad, I'm fine." I then remembered about the bright light and told him about it, and he just shook his head. He just said, "All right, let's unload this guy and then head for home." I was happy to hear that, let me tell you. We took care of business, and he asked me to come back to my family's house for the night rather than my apartment. He said that we'd come back the next day to grab my pickup. I was really happy because I was really tired for some reason, and on top of it, I was confused. I just agreed and followed my dad's lead. When we got back to my childhood home, my mom was awake and making food. I'm a Polish guy, and Polish moms make food for any reason, especially when they're worried. So I washed up and sat down to pierogi and kielbasa with my mom and dad and recapped the night. They were both wigged out, but I could tell they knew I was telling the truth about my drive in this lost period of time. My mom made me take off my t-shirt and pants as she said she couldn't stand the smell of this cinnamon scorch or whatever it was that was on them. so I took a shower to see if that lessened the smell. After a bit, I crawled into my living room and crashed on the couch to watch Chips reruns before I fell asleep. I know there's no super cool holy shit moment to this story, and the ending might sound lame, but that's really what happened to me. I cannot explain how I made up or lost that time on my way to Atlanta. It never happened again, and I really hope it doesn't. Anyone out there in podcast land got any ideas? I'm all ears to listen to what you think might have happened. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. If you'd like to hear your true scary story narrated here, email unclejoshtruescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. Please like, share, and subscribe to this channel, and if you'd like to take it one step further and support the channel, consider becoming a Patreon. If you want to do that, simply go to my website, truescarystories.net, and click on the support page. Follow me on social media. All of the links to that are in the description below. Until next time, everyone be excellent to each other. And remember, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.